Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Whiteboard Ministry, where I talk about anything and everything related to Christianity and the Bible. In this video, I want to talk about how following Jesus involves both a point and a process. This will be the last video in the evangelism series I've been working on, and I think that the ideas discussed in it sum up the topic pretty well. So let's get into it. I want to talk about two models or diagrams that illustrate two major ways that we can look at what it means to follow Jesus. I think both models are important to understand, and we should apply both in our approach to growing towards Jesus and sharing about him with others. When we appreciate both of these models, we get a better understanding of how our walk with Jesus is both a point and a process. Now that might sound like a vague thing to say, so I'll start explaining with the first model, which is called the bounded set. The bounded set model looks like this. We've got a box or a fence that separates two groups of people. In the context of Christianity, you could say that the people inside the box are Christians, people who call Jesus their Lord. Of course, that would mean that the people on the outside would be anyone who isn't a Christian. This model represents an us and a them sort of thinking. The important thing to note here is what the fence represents. If the people inside the fence are Christians, and those outside are not, then it would make sense that the fence in this diagram represents a decision to follow Jesus. Once you declare him as your Lord, you're in the box. And if you don't, you're outside. And people move in and out of this box all the time. Christians decide that they don't want to follow Jesus anymore, and non-Christians might decide that they want to. So that's the first model, called the bounded set. This second model comes from a quote from C.S. Lewis, the guy who wrote Narnia. Lewis says, "The world does not consist of 100% Christians and 100% non-Christians. There are people who are slowly ceasing to be Christians but who still call themselves by that name." He continues to say that there are people who are slowly becoming Christians, though they do not yet call themselves so. See, according to C.S. Lewis, this first model, the bounded set, doesn't tell the whole story because it doesn't clarify the direction that someone is moving, whether that be away or towards Jesus, despite what they might call themselves. And if we were to visualize what Lewis is saying, we would get the second model, which is called the centered set. The centered set looks like this. There's a cross in the center that represents Jesus, and all around the cross are people, represented by dots, who are either moving towards the cross or in some other direction away from it. Some dots are closer to the cross and others are far away, but that doesn't determine whether or not they're moving towards Jesus. What's interesting about this model is that it doesn't make a distinction between two types of people. Rather, it recognizes that everyone is on a journey. Some might be really close to Jesus, but start to turn away, and others might be super far away from Jesus, but begin to turn towards him. This centered set does a better job of illustrating the complexities of the human story, but just like the bounded set, it doesn't tell the whole story. While it's true that we're all on a unique journey or process towards Jesus, and we can all have an individual relationship with him, there still comes a point in every Christian's life where they confess that they believe Jesus is their Lord. Romans 10 verse 9 talks about this. It says, "If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." See, the bounded set is still important because there comes a point where we must clarify that we do follow Jesus. We hop the fence and join the in box. If this isn't making sense, maybe this analogy about my relationship with my wife will help. When the two of us first met, we began to grow closer. We started off as friends, and then we started dating. If you were to look at the centered set, you could say that we were moving towards loving each other more. Sometimes we got into fights and we might have grown apart, but we always made things right and strived to continue to grow closer. Eventually, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. The summer after that, at our wedding, we both said the two famous words, "I do." It was at that point that the bounded set came in. We hopped the fence into the married box and left the not married group. Even after marriage, though, we continue to grow closer and learn more about each other each day. And I hope this helps show how the bounded set and the centered set are both important. It was important that my wife and I continued to grow closer, but we couldn't get legally married unless we were willing to jump the fence and say, "I do." Now, even after marriage, we're still growing closer and we learn more about each other every day. In the same way, both of these models should be important to Christians and people who are curious about Jesus. You should always be focused on the process of growing towards him, but can't forget about the point that you chose or are going to choose to declare Jesus as your Lord. Now, I do want to make sure that I put this in the context of evangelism, so here's how we can do that. As Christians, we're people who have jumped the fence. We've gone into the box, and it's our job to recognize and respect the process of others who haven't made the same decision that we have. Everyone's free to make their own decisions and develop their own beliefs. But if you have a friend who's asking questions about believing God, make sure to answer those questions in love. But don't overwhelm them with deep theological things that only you want to talk about. It's not that they can't understand those things, but they probably won't care a whole lot because they're in a different place in their process. And it's also just as important to remember the point, the decision to hop the fence. If your friend or family member is at a point where you think they're ready to declare that they want to follow Jesus and live as a Christian, then help them take that next step. Recognize and respect that they're in a place where they're ready to make that ultimate decision and walk alongside them as they do. So that's the two models, the bounded set and the centered set. Now there's two questions that I want to leave you with that I think will help you to continue to digest these ideas. The first, I think, can be answered by anyone, Christian or not. It's sort of two questions in one. What model do you think is the most popular amongst Christians today, and which one do you think is the most important in today's society? Do Christians focus more on the point or the process? Which one of these two do you think we need to refocus on? The second question is similar but more personal, and it will probably relate more to Christian viewers. What model do you personally focus on the most? Do you focus more on the bounded set, the points, or do you emphasize the centered set, the process? So take some time to think about those questions throughout this next week. And with that, I'll wrap up this video and our series on the topic of evangelism. If you haven't watched the other videos I've made about evangelism, I recommend you go back and check those out. I'll leave a link to watch those at the end of this video and in the description below. One more thing before I go, I want to give credit to two people who deserve it. The first is a man named Sean Cullen. Sean's the national director of an organization called Power to Change Students. You can search them up on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll leave a link to their website in the description below. Power to Change is primarily a university and college campus ministry with a vision that says we long for the day when no student graduates without engaging with the life-changing message of Jesus. It was a conversation with Sean about these ideas that inspired this video, and I really appreciate the work that Power to Change does, so go check them out, especially if you're a university or college student. The second person I don't know personally, but his name is Paul HIEBERT. Paul's the man who came up with the two models I discussed, and he talked about them in his book called Anthropological Reflections on Missiological Issues. I'll leave an Amazon link to that in the description below as well. Thanks so much for watching. I'm looking forward to moving on to new topics in the future, but for now, I'll see you next week with another video revolving around Christianity and the Bible.